So holistic self-compassion is a topic that I really enjoy. It's a topic that's really important to me, and there's so much more to this topic than just what I'll give you today. I will tell you that I'm taking a lot from two different people. One is from Kristen Neff, who's written the book Self-Compassion. That's all she researches is self-compassion. And then the second one I'll talk about at the end is called Burnout. And it's actually science-based around this idea of burnout, not just kind of woo or kind of esoterical type stuff. This actual science-based, research-based, peer-reviewed. Yes, peer-reviewed in the last 10 years. Burnout, great book. They also have one on sex as well. So if you're interested in that, it's called Come As You Are. No pun intended, although I think it probably is. I haven't read that one yet, but these two are what I'm kind of basing my principles off of, but just weaving my own thoughts into it. So holistic self-compassion is this idea, and I want to just kind of walk you through it because I think it's actually really important to understand it, because a lot of times we've maybe self-compassion with this idea of like self-pity, which isn't the case. So when you think about what is compassion, or how would you describe compassion, you're welcome to pop those in the comments. I'll read them out, or you can unmute yourself as you if you want to. Just note that this is being recorded, so if you don't want anything to be shared, just say don't share or whatever, but I won't say who it is, but I'll just read them out. But when you think about compassion or showing someone compassion or being compassionate, what are some things that come to your mind? How would you describe that if someone asks you? Well, I'm asking you that question now. So I'll wait just a couple minutes here to see what people are going to say to me. How do we share compassion with ourselves is the next step. So when we look at self-compassion, or the definition of compassion is a strong feeling of sympathy and sadness for other people's suffering or bad luck, and a desire to help. So the difference between self-pity and self-compassion is that self-pity has a synonymous, like the idea of that is synonymous with compassion. But when you start acting in self-pity, you start judging yourself in a really negative way. You start to kind of pull yourself down into a negative space, like woe is me, kind of that's the idea of wallowing. Whereas I think self-compassion is this idea of being curious about where you are, or the feelings that you have, or the motivations that you have, as opposed to wallowing. Now, I'm all about having self-pity parties, and I'm always okay with wallowing a little bit. But sometimes we might resist this idea of being compassionate to ourselves because we think it's indulgent or brings about self-pity. That's why I wanted to bring that up with you. So for those of you who, I'll just make sure you guys can see this. So for those of you who are here in ISO life, COVID-19, I don't know when you'll be watching this. Hopefully one day it's a long, far-fetched reality of what we've been living in. But I remember it was like the first week of COVID schooling. I dare not even call it homeschooling, because it's not homeschooling, it's panic schooling, or whatever you want to call it, but it's not homeschooling by definition. I'm actually a trained teacher as well, so I should be able to kind of, pull myself up my own bootstraps. But oh my God. Taking your daughter, who is wild and crazy, and putting her at home and trying to make her do reading and math, and it was just crazy. And even like the first couple of days on Zoom with 15 6-year-olds is enough. That 10 minutes is enough for the whole day. So anyways, Andrew got home from work, and I was like, I'm out. And he had promised her some stuff that he wasn't able to do because the contractor came over. So she was crying, and I was like, I'm out of here. So like, I literally just walked out of the house, and I was like, I'll be back in an hour, and just went to the beach because I could feel my central nervous system totally keyed up. I could feel myself ready to snap, either, to myself or to my family or to whoever was in the path. And as I got onto the beach, which we live close to the beach and it's such a blessing, I started listening to Brene Brown's new podcast. So if you guys haven't listened to that, it's so good. It's on everything. It's just, I think it's called Unlocking Us. So someone in the chat section would know. I know Elaine's on today, but I think it's Unlocking Us, and it's such a good podcast. And she talks about this idea. she calls it the naughty word, which is the effing first time, but I'll make it PG here, which is the total first time. And when we have a total first time, which is what so many of us are dealing with or have dealt with in the last 4 weeks, and that's kind of why I brought about this presentation a couple weeks ago to another group of women and share it with you today, is that we are living, I feel like, almost daily in a total first time. Our school's going back, our surgery starting again. Do I have work as a nurse? Which ironically I don't at the moment because everything's under control, thank goodness. I won't be able, when do I go home? When can I fly back to America? We had 2 trips, planned this year to go back to the States. I have no idea when that's going to happen again. So what our central nervous system is trying to process is a total first time. We have no schema of reference. We have no neural pathways to really process what is happening to us very, very quickly. And so how we respond to that is usually by learned behavior or by cultural expectations, or there's also external pressures, of course, financial or familial or whatever. But what I want to say to you is that if you are feeling like you're really keyed up or you're not understanding what's going on, sometimes just saying, wow, this is an effing first time. She calls it an FFT. We can call it the total first time. You can use that language with your children. It's a really compassionate way to say, you know what? I know this is really hard for you because this is totally a first time for you. And you know what? Let's just name it. It sucks. It's hard. It's challenging. It's exhausting. It's scary. It's whatever it is. When you can take that thing or that trigger and you sit with it and you are compassionate with the feelings that you have, and as Kylie said earlier, you're validating those feelings and whatever you're in, it creates a well of grace. And that's where you can start to transform and to be curious about how you choose to cope. So what I do want to say, though, is I want to invite you into this idea of there's kind of, there's one more book that I wanted to bring. I don't have it right now with me. It's upstairs. But it's called Try Softer by Andi Cobbler. It's an excellent book. It is a bit Christian, so if that's not your thing, that's okay. But she does an excellent job of breaking down how our brains respond to trauma. And so she talks about big T trauma and little t trauma, and how little t trauma can turn into big T trauma if it's not dealt with. And so I'm not a psychologist or clin psych, although I will be at some point a mental health social worker. But I want to just say to you that I want you to understand how our brains work in a very general sense of like fight, flight, freeze. And then she also calls this idea of fawn. And I'll put some links up to where she talks about that, because that's actually a really interesting one. Fight, flight, and freeze, you guys all kind of get. But fawn is actually about you creating a response where you kind of try to walk on eggshells around someone to make sure that you don't make them angry. So it's not about fight, flight, or freeze. You're actually trying to fawn around someone, or you're trying to calm yourself down so that other person's calmed down. So you're trying to suppress your central nervous system response to make sure that you don't piss somebody else off. And that is really exhausting after a while if you don't have ways to deal with that, which we'll talk about. So I just want to stop the share here and share over to this video. Hope you guys are all finding this interesting. I love this stuff. So just make sure that you know that you'll be hearing a lot about this probably for the rest of my life. Let me just share this video with you because I think it's really important. It gives you just some schema of reference for what we're talking about.
Humans, like all species, have self-protective mechanisms to help us survive. Our fight, flight, or freeze survival response, the FFF for short, is designed to mobilize our brain and body to fight an enemy, run from an avalanche, or freeze to hide from a predator. Our brain sometimes misinterprets safe situations as dangerous and can set off false alarms. When the amygdala, our brain's watchdog, senses and barks danger, our body enters survival mode quicker than our rational mind can react, leaving it trying to figure out why we feel in mortal danger. When the FFF alarm is sounded, we start to breathe more quickly and shallow, causing hyperventilation, and our heart starts beating very fast. These changes can cause strong chest pain, which many people interpret as symptoms of a heart attack. when in fact it's just a result of the FFF activation, which can be relieved through breathing exercises. As a way of getting you ready for action, blood is diverted towards the major muscle groups. Blood flows away from our digestive system, causing the bladder to relax, and we might feel the need to pee. The mouth goes dry, nausea can occur, and we get the butterflies feeling in our stomach. Blood also rushes from extremities, leaving us with cold hands, but often sweaty palms as the action-ready body starts sweating to avoid overheating. Legs and hands can start trembling and feel weak, while tension starts building in big muscles like the thighs, neck, and shoulders. In our head, FFF alarms cause our brain to focus on negative memories, probably so it can scan them to avoid danger and negative outcomes. We get tunnel vision as our pupils dilate to increase our focus and long vision, but as a result, we lose our peripheral vision. FFF activation also reduces our ability to recognize differences in facial expressions. Too much oxygen and too little CO2 can result in dizziness or lightheadedness, which many people interpret as signs that they might faint. But because fainting is caused by a drastic drop in blood pressure, and because the FFF increases both our heart rate and blood pressure, it's nearly impossible to faint when this happens. Over time, depression, anxiety, and high levels of stress all harm the brain's ability to slow or cancel false FFF activations, causing them to happen more often. Knowing the symptoms of false activations makes it easier to recognize and reduce their effects. At Tanky Boxing, you can learn both bottom-up and top-down techniques to reduce false FFF activation and bring your body back to balance.
So I wanted to share that with you because I think one of the things that we need to understand is that for some people in a mental health situation, that we need to be really mindful of that this can be really triggering for us, right? Like I know that most of you followed me for a while, or maybe you haven't, and you know that in 2016 I sought treatment for an eating disorder, a binge eating disorder, and food addiction, and I have had to be very, very careful and very mindful of my own response on a neurochemical level, on a neurobiological level throughout the last 6 weeks. Because if I'm not taking care of my central nervous system, the pathways that have been there for a very long time, since I was about 5 years old, are flipped because I'm scared and I don't know what's going on, right? And so I wanted to bring this to you because some of the techniques that I use, I'm not a clin psych, I'm not a psychologist, but these are just my own things that I've used through my own practice. They're very general, and it will give you hopefully some ideas of things that you can implement in your life or with your kids or with people that you love. Because mental health doesn't just pick on one person or one type of person. It picks on all of us. It can impact all of us, is I guess the word I'm trying to say. Even my husband, who is pretty like low key, I said to him, babe, I feel like you're really anxious about what's happening. He's like, I am anxious. And me being able to say that to him was really comforting him. Then we could talk about it and move on. So one of the things I want to talk about is this idea in our own bodies, just as an overview, and I'm happy to add this to the Facebook event. There's a lot of different definitions, I can never get this mouse right, about this, but this idea of hyper arousal is where we have fight and flight. So we can get in our sympathetic nervous system. I won't go into the details of the automatic and parasympathetic and all that kind of stuff because you'll get confused. But what I do want you to understand is that this is what happens. Yelling, defensive, pacing, hyper alert, runaway, uncomfortable, panic, rage, and fear. Too much energy, you just feel really keyed up. Like you're on, you're totally on, and your eyes are dilated and you're ready to go. And this is what I feel. For me, this is one way that we can feel our bodies dysregulating, right? So that anxiety, that panic, that fear, that rage, that yelling, that snapping is a sign that perhaps we're a little bit dysregulated, right? And we're in that fight or flight rage, you're hyper aware, you're hyper aroused. The dysregulation on the opposite side is hypoarousal. So again, this is just general overview. You guys can read this, is where you're shutting down. So you're slow and you're tired and you kind of feel flat. Maybe you feel numb. you're pulling away, you're just really foggy. Now, I think a lot of us have felt that way. Is there, if you're in the chat function and you feel like you want to share with us maybe something that is relevant to you, like my husband totally freezes, 100% freezes. He's a freezer. He is a sleeper and a freezer whenever he freaks out. I, however, go into like the hyper arousal until I get so fried that I then flip down into freeze, or I'm just like, I'm just so tired. So what I want to say to you is that both of these can happen to us, and we can fluctuate between those two. And what happens when you are compassionate with yourself is you say, isn't it interesting that I'm feeling dysregulated? You're able to give language to a very physiological response to things which are a TFT or an FFT or a known situation. So we'll come back to this, right? So this is all about a tool to help with dysregulation. There are many tools, there are many treatment plans, and you know what? I'm not against medication either. I'm an advocate for whatever helps you feel safe and regulated. This is just one practice that has helped me to bring myself back into the middle. I'm not always perfect. Ask my husband. So when you're looking at self-compassion, Kristen Neff breaks it down to 3 different parts, which I love. And we're going to explore those today, and I'll give you time to reflect. And if you want to share, you can. So the first is self-kindness versus self-judgment, common humanity versus isolation, and mindfulness versus over-identification, which I think is a really interesting one. So why is self-compassion important? I've kind of talked about that. I think the other thing that I really love about self-compassion is this twofold idea. One is I think it allows us to create a connection to a spiritual practice, i.e. faith, i.e. religion, i.e. spiritual practice, whatever that looks like for you, that's very healthy, right? That becomes one that is your own practice, that you can learn to kind of slough off any sort of dogmatic rule in whatever context you were raised in or whatever way that you've been in. I've been in all contexts. I've been in evangelical churches all the way through a very spiritual MLM. I've been through all of them. So being able to create a relationship in my own practice, my own faith practice that is mine, and to surround myself with people who challenge me and support me in that has been very important to me. The second, and I won't talk a lot about it tonight, is idea about our bodies and food. Now, that's my story, and I know that there's some people on here who have the same, and I'm sure that there are people who are quietly trying to figure out all of this, how to regulate emotionally in a world right now that is saturated in conversation around weight gain and packing on the certain amount of kilos and the quarantine 15, all of these kind of really dysregulating or disassociating language. Every time that we focus in on removing ourselves from our bodies through a diet or a rigid exercise regime or a restriction of food groups that isn't medically indicated, all we do is rip compassion out. It is not compassionate to starve yourself. It is not compassionate to be punitive around food and exercise. It is compassionate to listen to what your body needs, but we have not harnessed that as women in particular in a society where constantly we are being told that we are not enough, or that we feed into that constantly by yo-yo dieting or restricting. So what I want to say to you is that maybe that's something that's coming up for you right now, and that's fine. That's a whole other kettle of fish. But this could potentially start the pathway for you to be more compassionate towards yourself in this season or in any other seasons in our lives. So the first one that I want to talk about today is self-kindness. So this idea that in order to be compassionate, we first have to be kind. We need to be kind to ourselves. We need to be gentle with ourselves. I know that the first couple of days I am an Enneagram 8. I don't know if you know Enneagram. I'm an Enneagram 8. I'm a type A. I'm a go-getter. And I sat down with Ainsley and I was like, right, we have to get all this done, or I have to get all this curriculum sorted. And then I was like, well, who cares? This is ridiculous. But I could tell in myself, if I'm going to give you self-disclosure here, that Ainsley is not driven by production or performance. She's not at all. And so what was really challenging for me was that I wanted her to, there's a couple we have on this team app, these parents, right? And so there's a couple parents on the team app who have kids that are way further along than Ainsley when it comes to reading, and they just love to give their kids a lot of work because it makes them feel good, and they take all these pictures and put them up. And I actually got to the point where I had to ring the teacher and say, I'm actually not sorry about this. I find this really triggering, and I can no longer engage in that forum because it's actually not healthy for me. Because what it was doing was triggering all of this perfectionism in me. It was all my shit. It wasn't Ainsley's shit. It was all my stuff that I have to work on still. But one of the things that you can do when that criticism or that judgment is coming up is to be compassionate with that and say, well, what is this actually about? What is it that you really need right now? Right? It's about being gentle about the thought patterns in your mind. For me, it's like, your body is you are available to your body, and you are connected to your body, and no matter what shape your body is, you're worthy and loved. It's not going to matter what anyone says or what weight you are, how many calories you do or don't ingest. It's about being compassionately connected in. So as we go through this idea, the first idea is this idea of self-compassion is in kindness. Now, some people were talking or asked me earlier about how then can you make change in your life if you're compassionate, which I would go back to say being compassionate doesn't mean being complacent. Just because you're kind to yourself doesn't mean that you can't change the way you eat. It doesn't mean that you can't change the way you interact, or that you can't advance your career or still be an entrepreneur. It just means that you go into each of those situations with a completely different filter. So that when you are pushing yourself, you know it's not forever. If you are working on food or relationship with another thing that you want to work on, you are compassionate and you go at the speed that is sustainable for you, not just like that. You're not looking for the end result quickly. You're looking for a beautiful, kind pathway that may take longer than you had originally thought was the right amount of time, but you get there in a really sustainable way. So you still can change, and you still can expand, and you still can move through comfort zones. It just looks really different. It's gentle, but it's also extremely powerful. Are there any thoughts about that? Anyone want to pipe in, jump on and share anything? I know there's chats here. Let me find something. Freeze. Especially comparison, man. Especially comparison, especially in the entrepreneurial space, or just anywhere really. Being really observant about your judgment and being compassionate with it. So some questions for you to think about, and you're welcome to respond back if you'd like to. When does your inner critic come out? When is that voice in the back of your mind coming out? One of the things I've had to really focus in on recently with my amazing nutritional coach, I don't even call her a nutritional coach, she's actually a registered dietitian, was how often I would body check. Right? So how often was I looking in the mirror, looking at my stomach, looking at the mirror, looking at my stomach, looking in the mirror, looking at my stomach constantly? That's judgment. That's just ingrained judgment. So I had to learn how to be compassionate with that and be like, that's just my anxiety. I just have to deal with it and wash through it, rinse through it. Isn't that interesting that this comes up when this happens? So you start becoming a curious observer of patterns that you would maybe wish to change. What purpose does being self-critical serve you? I always think that being self-critical serves us a purpose, and usually it's vulnerability. Usually. So you can start to be self-critical because either you don't want to be vulnerable to something, or you're looking for affection or some sort of affection from someone or something. Not all the time, but it's interesting for you if self-critical, or you know someone who's really self-critical, what is it that they're actually searching for? In what ways can I act in kindness to the view of my body or food choices? We've already talked about that. And one of the key phrases for this question or this area is I'm curious. I'm curious as to what it is I need right now. So if you start to become really hypercritical of yourself or really hypercritical of other people, that's another one. Or that inner critic is coming up. Like my kids should be doing more, or my house isn't clean enough, or I should be eating better because I've got all this time to make good food, or however you start labeling stuff. What is it that you actually need right now? What is it that you're trying to mask with being not kind to yourself? those are some really great questions to guide yourself with. So the second one is common humility, which I really love. And I think that we're seeing this a lot. Not really sure we're seeing it very much in the US. If there's anyone from America on here other than me, I'm sorry, but wow, go America. So when common humility is about this genuine connection to others. So not just superficial connection. And I actually ironically think that this whole season that we're going through right now with COVID-19 in many ways is making people more genuinely connected with others, or at least I feel like I'm more connected to my family, ironically, or my friends. Like I'm having a really tough day or having a great day, or being a lot more vulnerable with each other because we're all isolated and we all recognize that we need that common humanity right now. We need that connection right now because we can't physically have that connection. We can't touch people. We can't hug people. So we need that verbal communication is really important right now. I also feel like we're kind of all in it together. Like we're all trying to be as best stewards as we can right now, although there's a lot of varying opinions of how that looks and what's happening, and that's fine. But I do feel genuinely that there's a common vested interest in humanity, and that we're starting to see people, we're starting to recognize that everyone is on an equal playing field right now, which makes us feel in some ways connected. Not that it's all equity based, but I think that there's a humanness that's coming about, which is nice. Connection to faith and spirituality is really important. And so whatever that looks like for you, I know that some of us who are churchgoers have had to then go online, which has been sometimes challenging for some people, or the fact that you're stuck with your kids and you can't get out, so you don't have that time to decompress. But connection to faith and spirituality is one. And connection to our truth. I think that it's really important, a really good time for us to be compassionate about what we're willing to take forward in our own mind, what values and core belief systems that we want to take forward after this is all over. I feel like sometimes we're given these seasons of reset, even though we don't necessarily want them, as long as we maybe sometimes we're given them. But it's a really great time for us to think about, so what is it that we really need to feel connected and emotionally stable? I know for us, like we've done way more bike rides. We've done way more board games. I've never cooked this much from scratch in my life. Like I'm baking again, which I haven't baked for like over 10 years. And I'm like, this is so nice. It's really, really nice. And I don't know if I'm willing to give that up again. So you're really looking at what is it that I want to keep and what is it that I want to take away, and allowing yourself to be curious about those things is important. So some questions for this idea of common humanity are: what spiritual practices are important for you to stay connected to yourself, to your creator, to your spiritual force? What is it that you need to regulate? Are there any people, I'm sure there are people who are empaths on this call. Are there anyone who feels like they absorb, I guess a way that you could describe it would be like absorb people's energy, or you walk into a room and you're just really connected to people? I see a lot of people chatting right now. Yes. So when you are an empath, like, let me just speak to you really quickly about this. When you are an empath, you must have daily practices to regulate. One, because it allows you to stay deeply connected to your spiritual force and your intuition. But the second is that when empaths don't allow themselves to regulate or to move through the emotion that they often absorb or that they carry for other people, they actually start to just kind of freeze. So I want to give you, if you are an empath, full permission to carve out as much time as you possibly can. I know some people on here have little kiddos, so that's hard. But even if it's just a half an hour where you do something very rich to regulate yourself, I don't care what that looks like, if that's music or meditation or a bath or however that looks. But for people who are quite empathic or who are the feelers of the world, it is absolutely crucial in this time. A way that you can be deeply self-compassionate is to acknowledge that you are that way and to really make sure that you regulate every single day. Hands down. Empaths are the ones that I find the most affected by things like this, and who are often the ones that are told to squish down their sensitivity. And so being compassionate about your sensitivity and holding space, that's really, really important. What does your community look and feel like for you? So what does that look like for you in a normal day, like outside of COVID-19? How do you create community, and who do you want in your community, right? And also, what values are your guiding principles? Like, how do you value that connection? Are you building deep relationships? And the second, the most important part of this common humanity is around safety. What feels safe? What does safety feel like to you? And what does safety look like for you? Our central nervous systems cannot regulate if they don't feel safe. Period. If you do not know what safe looks and feels like for you, it is very difficult for your central nervous system to come back into equilibrium. It's really hard. So if you are feeling consistently unsafe, your central nervous system is consistently keyed up. And what I want to say to you is that if you're feeling consistently unsafe and you're not able to bring yourself into regulation, it may be time for you to seek extra help, and that's okay. But I think one of the best things to ask yourself, if all that you take away from self-compassion that we talk about is to be kind to yourself, and the second one is, what is safe right now? What do I need to feel? What do I need to bring in or remove or ask for to feel safe? Because the moment that you feel safe, then you can start to kind of like relax your shoulders and you can kind of like drop into your emotion. But if you're feeling like this all of the time, it's really difficult to regulate yourself if you don't feel safe. It's just like kids. If kids don't feel safe, they're clingy, they're tantruming, they're crying, they want to be on you the whole time. They want to be next to you. Ainsley has been up in our room a lot more. It's not as much anymore, but in the beginning, she was in our room almost every single night because she needed to feel safe. It's the same for adults. So don't undermine this idea that safety is extremely important. It's been a very important part of self-compassion. You don't need to white knuckle your way through this. You don't need to keep pushing all of your emotions down. If you don't feel safe, then it is extremely difficult to bring in compassion. So I want you to remember that. And that's actually a really good question to ask your children or grandchildren or people around you, or if you're a teacher or whatever. What do you need to feel? What is it that you need right now to feel safe? And kids are very good at answering that question. And that actually, once you can deal with that, then you can start to have them emotionally open up. But until any of us feel safe, it's very difficult for us to communicate it is what we need. And the last one is mindfulness. So mindfulness is about bringing in awareness of joy and just bringing your own awareness back into your body. So it's kind curiosity. It's curiosity about what's safe, and then that's able to help you drop into a connection between your head and your body. Does anyone here ever feel like they just work up in here? They just work in their head space. They don't actually drop down into their body, or they don't even know how to be connected to their bodies, right? So that's about being holistically connected and aware. Oftentimes in dieting or body image stuff, we kind of just chop our heads off. We stay up here. We don't even know our body. We don't even know our hunger cues anymore. Or we've learned to squish them down so much we don't even honor. Sometimes we have a hard time honoring that. We don't feel our body. We hate it so much. We're not connected to it. Or we're not connected to what it is really that we want in our spirituality, or what it is that our emotions are actually asking of us, because we're either too afraid to bring forth what it is, or we're just not even aware of them. We don't have language. So mindfulness, again, faith and spirituality, embodying your body, being in your body, asking your body what it needs, honoring what it says. I need rest. I need to walk. I need exercise. I need food. I need water. I need less coffee, Michelle, less coffee, Michelle, less coffee, Michelle. Boundaries is another huge one, in creativity and expansion. So we'll talk about that. So ways to connect back into your body. Some of us have had challenging relationships with exercise, which can be quite punitive and kind of legalistic. And so perhaps that's not a way to connect back into your body. I'm curious to know how I emotionally regulate. What is it that you need to bring yourself back into that safe zone of regulation? What is it that you need on a daily practice or right now to bring yourself back into a compassionate way of feeling regulated, where you're not in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn? What is your best yes and your best no? So I don't know if there's people who are on this call today who are yes people. Someone asks you, yes. Can you do that? Yes. Can you do that? Yes. Can you do that? Yes. And often the things that are left behind are you. It's usually you and then your marriage and then your kids, because you're trying to say yes to too many people. So figuring out what it is that centers you and keeps you regulated, and then figuring out, is that yes going to tip me over the edge right now? One of my favorite questions for mindfulness is, what is my capacity right now? Not, I could do it, I can do it, I have time, my schedule to do it, I've got all the time in the world right now to do it. But what is my capacity right now? What is my capacity for myself right now? What's the capacity for my family right now? What's the capacity for our finances right now? What's the capacity of my children right now? That's a more important question than, can I do it or not? And sometimes we do pack our schedules because we have to or because we want to. But a better question is, what is my capacity? And a better response is, you know what? I would really love to do that, but actually we just don't have the capacity to commit to that right now. So that's a really gentle, compassionate, kind way of saying, I can't do it. And every time that you compassionately honor your boundaries, you give that other person who you're reciprocating that response to the same permission, so that we all stay regulated. And I remember when I went to a psych a year ago, and my capacity was probably about 20%. And it took me a whole year to get to about 80%. But I just kept saying, it's not my capacity. It's not my capacity, until my central nervous system could catch up with my mind. It's not usually your mind doesn't have the capacity. It's actually your body. Your body's tired. I'm interested in how positive boundaries or a lack of boundaries impact my life. That's a really great question. So if you're feeling like you're beyond your capacity, I'm interested in understanding why I keep saying yes when my capacity isn't there anymore. So ways to bring in mindfulness, and this is from the book Burnout. So this is a really great book, science-based book around burnout and mindfulness. The first one is moving your body. I don't care how you move your body. I don't care if it's a moving meditation or a walk or a yoga or running or stretching or dance. I don't care what it is, but the most quick way to change and to move through your stress cycle and to bring yourself back into a regulated space is moving your body. The second is breathing, which we'll do at the end together. Breathing practices, prayer, meditation, positive social interaction. So people who are not constantly like leeching you of emotional energy, ones that have fun interactions, laughter. Okay, so if you have a partner or someone that you can affectionately kiss for 6 seconds, I often would say that to my husband, I need a 6-second kiss, which then he thought would move further than 6 seconds, but you can always keep it to a tight 6 if you need to. A 20-second hug. I often say to my husband now, I just need you to hold me. And I will say, I want you to hold me for 20 seconds. Now he thinks I'm crazy, but it's amazing if you hold your kid or someone that you love for 20 seconds, not just 10 seconds, a full proper 20 seconds, you can actually feel your body relax. It actually just drops. Crying is completely normal. It is actually one of a really effective way to reboot your central nervous system. It's why children have tantrums. They need to reboot their central nervous system. It's okay to cry. And the last one is creative expression. So however that looks for you, if that's music or painting or cooking or crocheting or puzzle making, doing puzzles, all of these things are ways that you then can be curious to say, you know what, I'm actually feeling really dysregulated, and what I really need is a freaking hug, or I need to go move my body in a really compassionate, nourishing way, not a punitive, legalistic way. So the last thing is just a recap here. So self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. I'm curious, I wonder, I'm interested. All really good ways to bring forth self-compassion for all of us who are in a total first time. So that's just my my presentation, I guess, for you guys today, my webinar, because I just feel like these are things that are helping me, so I want to share them with you. These are books that I absolutely love. Gifts of Imperfection, Falling Upwards, Burnout, Self-Compassion, which I've already showed you, Embracing Slow is excellent, and Shauna Nequist's Present Over Perfect became an anthem for me about 2 years ago. And I've also launched my new website. If y'all want to go to it, it's mishpope.life. But I just wanted to just share those with you.